Margaret Thorne's boots crunched through the dry acacia leaves as dawn broke over the Kenyan highlands. 40 years as a wildlife veterinarian had taught her to read the bush like scripture, and something was wrong. The usual morning chorus of birds had fallen silent. She found her at the base of the escarpment, a lioness, golden coat matted with dust and sweat, flanks heaving in shallow, desperate gasps. Margaret's breath caught. The animal's eyes, glazed with pain, fixed on her with an intensity that should have sent her running. Instead, she saw what her instincts had already told her: this magnificent creature was dying. The lioness tried to rise, managed only a weak snarl. Her swollen belly contracted violently, and she collapsed back with a sound that was almost human. Labor. Hours into it, by the look of her. And something had gone catastrophically wrong. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her radio, then stopped. The nearest vet station was 3 hours away. She had maybe one. "Easy, girl," she whispered, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. The lioness watched her approach, too exhausted to flee, too weak to fight. Margaret had delivered hundreds of cubs in her career, but never like this, never alone, never unprotected, never with an animal that could kill her with a single swipe even in this diminished state. She knelt just beyond reach, studying the contractions. Breech birth. The cub was stuck. The lioness's breathing turned ragged, each exhale a surrender. Their eyes met again, and Margaret saw something that would haunt her forever: a mother's desperation, a silent plea that transcended species. This was a creature who understood she was failing, who knew her cubs would die with her. Margaret thought of her daughter, lost to a car accident 20 years ago. She thought of all the last chances she'd never taken, all the moments fear had stolen from her. She thought of why she'd spent her life in the wild to begin with. "I'm going to help you," she said quietly, pulling her emergency kit from her pack. "But you're going to have to trust me." The lioness's tail twitched once, acknowledgement or warning, Margaret couldn't tell. She moved closer anyway, reaching toward the impossible, her weathered hands steady with purpose. Margaret's fingers found the cub's hindquarters first, small, impossibly fragile, wedged at an angle that would kill them both. The lioness growled, a sound that vibrated through the earth, but didn't strike. Her body understood what her instincts resisted: this human was her only chance. "Stay with me," Margaret murmured, her voice the only tether to sanity. She'd done this procedure a dozen times in sterile clinics with sedated animals. Never in the dirt with a conscious predator inches from her throat. She worked quickly, fingers slick with amniotic fluid, repositioning the cub degree by painful degree. The lioness's claws scraped rock, carving furrows in stone. Her jaws snapped shut near Margaret's shoulder, close enough to feel the heat of her breath, controlled enough to miss. A test. A warning. A prayer. "I know it hurts," Margaret said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "God, I know." The cub shifted. Margaret felt it give, felt the terrible resistance finally break. She pulled gently, steadily, as another contraction seized the lioness. The great cat threw her head back in a silent scream. Then, a wet rush, and the cub slid free into Margaret's hands. She cleared its airways with practiced efficiency, rubbing the tiny body until it gasped, mewled, and began to squirm. The lioness turned her massive head, nostrils flaring. For one crystalline moment, Margaret held her breath, the living cub cradled against her chest, utterly defenseless. The lioness's rough tongue grazed Margaret's knuckles as she took her baby, and something in Margaret's chest cracked open. Two more came easier. The lioness knew now what was happening, knew this strange human with gentle hands was giving her back her life. She licked each cub clean with methodical devotion while Margaret sat back, exhausted, exhilarated, her shirt soaked with blood and birth. The sun climbed higher, painting the escarpment gold. 3 cubs nursed greedily, their mothers purr a deep rumble of contentment. Margaret should leave. Every instinct screamed it, but the lioness looked at her once more, amber eyes clear now, intelligent. She shifted slightly, making space in the shelter of her body. An invitation. Margaret moved closer, close enough to feel the lioness's warmth, to hear the tiny grunts of satisfaction from the cubs. Close enough to touch the impossible. Margaret counted 3 cubs, two females and a male, each no larger than her forearm, their spots still faint against tawny fur. They kneaded their mother's belly with miniature paws, blind and perfect and alive. The lioness lay spent, her breathing finally deep and even. But Margaret had seen enough post-birth complications to know exhaustion could be as deadly as the labor itself. The great cat hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. Her ribs pressed too prominently against her hide. "You need strength," Margaret whispered, already moving. She retrieved the dried kudu meat from her pack, her own lunch, meant for a full day's trek. She placed it within reach and backed away. The lioness watched her, unmoving. Then, with visible effort, she stretched her neck and took the offering. The sound of her eating was urgent, ravenous. Margaret fetched water next, pouring her entire canteen into a depression between rocks. The lioness drank deeply, pausing only to check her nursing cubs. An hour passed. The sun climbed toward noon, and Margaret knew she couldn't stay. The pride would return eventually, or worse, males who might kill cubs that weren't theirs. She needed to be gone before the delicate peace shattered. She gathered her kit slowly, giving the lioness time to understand. "You're going to be fine now. All of you." As she stood, slinging her pack across her shoulders, the lioness raised her head. Their eyes met, human and predator, mother and mother. Then the great cat did something Margaret had never seen in 4 decades of fieldwork. She stood, legs trembling with effort, and closed the distance between them. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. The lioness's breath was hot against her face as she leaned forward, and gently, deliberately, pressed her massive forehead against Margaret's chest. Once. Twice. A gesture Margaret had seen lions use with their own pride. Recognition. Gratitude. Trust. Margaret's hand moved of its own accord, settling briefly on the sun-warmed fur between the lioness's ears. "You're welcome," she breathed. The lioness returned to her cubs, circling them protectively before settling down. She watched Margaret begin to walk away, her tail curling around her newborns. Margaret made it 50 yards before she looked back. The lioness was still watching, and something in Margaret's practical, scientific mind whispered, "This isn't over." She was right. The low growl came from behind her. Margaret's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, every muscle locked in primal terror. 20 feet away, emerging from the tall grass like a ghost made flesh, stood another lioness, larger, unmarked by birth, her golden eyes fixed on Margaret with predatory focus. Margaret's mind raced through her options. Running would trigger the chase instinct. Standing still might buy seconds. Her hand crept toward the knife at her belt, knowing how useless it would be. The new lioness took a step forward, then another. Her muscles rippled beneath her coat, coiled power ready to explode. Margaret could see her calculating, measuring the distance, deciding whether this human was prey or threat. Then the mother lioness called out, a sound between a grunt and a chirp, urgent and unmistakable. The approaching lioness stopped. Her ears swiveled forward, her entire posture shifting. She answered with the same vocalization, and suddenly the air changed. The tension didn't vanish, but it transformed into something else entirely. Margaret watched, breathless, as the two lionesses touched noses. The newcomer's tail rose, curved in greeting, and she rubbed her cheek along her sister's jaw, the universal language of family. The mother lioness rumbled deep in her chest, then turned toward the cubs, pride evident in every movement. The sister approached the newborns with careful steps, sniffing each one thoroughly. Her reaction was instantaneous, a flood of affectionate licks, gentle nudges, the unmistakable behavior of an aunt meeting her nieces and nephew for the first time. But then she turned back to Margaret. The woman stood frozen as the second lioness padded toward her, each step deliberate. This was the moment. This lioness hadn't witnessed the birth, hadn't felt Margaret's hand saving her sister's life. She had no reason to trust, every reason to eliminate a threat near vulnerable cubs. 5 feet away. 4. 3. The lioness stopped, studying Margaret with an intelligence that was almost human. She glanced at her sister, who watched calmly, nursing the cubs. Some communication passed between them, something Margaret couldn't hear but could feel in the marrow of her bones. The second lioness sat down. Not an attack. Not a retreat. A decision. Margaret exhaled slowly, understanding flooding through her. The mother had vouched for her. And in the intricate social world of lions, that meant everything. The second lioness rose and walked past Margaret toward the bush line. She paused, looked back, and made a sound Margaret had only read about in research papers, the contact call lionesses use to summon their young. From the undergrowth, 2 adolescent cubs emerged, perhaps 4 months old, their spots still visible. They bounded toward their mother, then froze when they saw Margaret. The lioness chuffed softly, and the cubs relaxed, coming to investigate the strange human with cautious curiosity. But it was what the lioness did next that stopped Margaret's heart. She turned and disappeared into the grass. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. Margaret stood motionless, the mother lioness watching her steadily, the adolescents playing near the newborns with surprising gentleness. Then the second lioness returned, dragging something heavy. A Thompson's gazelle. Freshly killed, still warm. She dropped it at Margaret's feet. Margaret stared, her scientific mind struggling to process what her heart already understood. This wasn't scavenging behavior. This wasn't territorial display. This was reciprocity, a gift, deliberately given, acknowledgement of a debt paid. The lioness sat back, tail curling around her haunches, and waited. With trembling hands, Margaret pulled out her phone. She'd carried it for emergencies, never expecting signal out here. 1 bar flickered. She aimed the camera and captured it, the 2 lionesses side by side, the 5 cubs between them, and the offering laid at her feet. The mother lioness looked directly into the lens, amber eyes luminous with intelligence. Margaret whispered into the recording, "They understand. God help me, they understand." The video reached 50 million views in 3 days. Wildlife biologists descended on the region, documenting the pride Margaret now called the sisterhood. Her footage became the centerpiece of a conservation campaign that raised $2 million in a month. The Kenyan government designated the area a protected corridor, ensuring the pride's territory would remain undisturbed. Margaret returned weekly, always stopping at the escarpment's base. The lionesses would emerge, the cubs growing stronger each visit, and sit with her in companionable silence. She never touched them again, never needed to. On her final visit before the rains came, the 3 original cubs, now robust and playful, tumbled over each other to reach her first. The mother lioness watched her children greet the human who'd given them life, and if Margaret didn't know better, she would have sworn the great cat smiled. Some bonds, she'd learned, transcend everything we think we know about the world. Even the wild recognizes grace.